Hello everyone and welcome. E3 is cancelled, and some of you have been worried that it means Nintendo won't be having their big Nintendo Direct in June. Thankfully, Jeff Keighley is holding his own gaming event to fill in the gap left by E3. And honestly, even without Summer Games Fest, Nintendo would likely still have their June Direct ready to go with very little if any changes. I'm sure Nintendo will have some smaller announcements just for the event itself, but the Direct will be where all of their big games are planned. Hopefully, we get something similar to E3 2016, where the Direct was strongly focused on Breath of the Wild, with the Nintendo Treehouse giving even more of a focus on the game when the Direct was over, and had many interviews with Aonuma, Miyamoto, Fujibayashi, and others. With this Direct less than a few weeks away, I wanted to give 10 of my own predictions on what I think will happen. Keep in mind, this isn't what I am hoping will happen, but what I believe will happen. And some of my predictions on this list are actually really bad. We will be having a fun game of bingo for the Direct. You can join our Discord and fill out your own bingo card with your predictions. And we will try to do a giveaway for a few eShop cards for the top 3 people who get the most Nintendo Direct predictions correct on their bingo card. As always, at the end of this video, we will be giving some of you shoutouts and answering your questions left on our previous video. So if you would like a shoutout and to have your question answered on our next video, or our podcast, the Highland Gamescast, please leave your questions in the comments below. If you are new to the channel, comment below and say when you subscribed, along with your question. And I'll also give as many of you as I can a shoutout in the next video, as well as a like and heart on all of the comments. Number 1. Switch 2. No, not a Switch Pro, a full next-gen Switch 2. I think this one is really obvious. It seems they are talking about it more and more with each interview, investors meetings, and sometimes even completely unprompted. It reminds me a lot of when Miyamoto and others publicly announced the Nintendo Switch for the first time, codenamed Nintendo NX at the time. I think Nintendo will at the very least mention the Nintendo Switch successor and say to expect more at a later date this year or early next year. What I would love is if they ended their Direct with the announcement for a Switch 2, and then show a sizzle reel consisting of a lot of the big games Nintendo already showed off previously. Nintendo already showed off for the Switch previously earlier in the Direct, but then have the gameplay or cutscenes for the games shown side by side with a direct graphical comparison. Without going into detail on the specs and giving a lot of numbers that may confuse the casual gamers, they can use the side-by-side comparison to simply show exactly how much better games on the next-gen console will look. After all, while specs are important, it really comes down to how good the system architecture for the console is, how easy the console is to develop games for, and how well the developer is able to actually take advantage of that extra performance. For example, 2 developers, one more knowledgeable than the other, could be working separately on the exact same type of game, using the same engine. And one would be running at a constant 60 frames and a high resolution, while the other is barely able to run without crashing. So with specs, it really just comes down to exactly what the developers are able to do with that performance. And this would be the best way to show it off. Because even if they give us the specific amount of RAM, GPU and CPU clock speed, all of the raw performance numbers, that still wouldn't necessarily answer the question, which is, would it be able to play Breath of the Wild at 4K and 60 frames per second, instead of just 900p and 30 frames per second? However, getting that side-by-side comparison instantly answers all the questions most people would still end up having after being told the numbers. It also gives us sort of a bonus, letting us know that Nintendo's next-gen Switch successor is backwards compatible. This is all just me dreaming though. Most likely, the Direct would focus on the actual games and have us looking forward to another Direct or presentation later on. But what do you all think? 2. Breath of the Wild 2. Yeah, this is another big obvious one. As mentioned earlier, I am hoping Nintendo does something similar to their 2016 E3 Direct, which focused on Breath of the Wild and was followed up with hours of Nintendo Treehouse giving even more gameplay and details. I think we will get the reveal of the official title, a more specific date, hopefully the exact date, but something tells me even if Nintendo already knows it, they may end up changing it for some reason, as they always do. One reason that I wouldn't be so upset about would be a dual release on Switch and its successor. I actually have a really good reason for why I think the Switch successor will be announced towards the end of this video, as part of another prediction. Fujibayashi or Aonuma will likely give a new trailer, discuss what little info on the game's story that they can, and some other random details on abilities, characters, or locations, which would have them talking over actual gameplay and screenshots showing off exactly what it is they're talking about. If Fujibayashi is the one introducing the game, I could see Aonuma being the one who mentions its amiibo support, and maybe even a hint as another Zelda project. 3. Mario Movie. I don't have too much to say on this. I think Miyamoto will show up with a huge smile, make a couple of jokes, introduce an official trailer of the Mario movie, then give some details on the story, actors, and development of the movie. Maybe even introduce some of the voice actors who will give a few sentences about how great the movie will be and how excited they are working on it. 4. Metroid Prime. I really want to cheat and just say Metroid Prime. Not Metroid Prime 4, Metroid Prime Trilogy, or a full Metroid Prime 1 remake. Honestly, a remaster or HD port wouldn't really take that long to bring to the Switch, depending on how many changes they want to make and how good they want the game to look. I am in the belief that, similar to Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD, the Trilogy Collection or Prime 1 is already done, and just waiting for the right time to have its announcement. As for Metroid Prime 4, it has been years since the game restarted development, and has had more than enough time to give us a trailer and have the game mostly finished. So I see no reason as to why we wouldn't get at least a trailer. And if we're lucky, maybe the trailer will consist of the title, Metroid Prime 4, but with a new addition, the subtitle, which I have been calling Metroid Prime 4 _. Or at least I try to until Daniel starts smacking me. 5. Zelda Remake or Port. Do you think there is a chance we could see both Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD? Maybe not released in a collection, which I strongly doubt would happen, but released as two standalone games either side by side on the same date, or one a month or two after the other. Maybe even a limited release similar to Super Mario 3D All-Stars, before Super Mario 3D World and Bowser's Fury released. I think Twilight Princess HD from Tantalus is the obvious port, but I also find it hard to believe Nintendo would release it before Wind Waker HD. If you are interested, I do have a video listing 10 changes I would like to see made to Twilight Princess HD if it were to be brought to the Switch. Yes, Tantalus denied they were working on it, but they also denied they were working on Skyward Sword HD when it was in development. So it's hard for us to take what they say or even what Nintendo says at face value. Although most people are unaware of NDAs and don't realize that even if they are working on it, they legally have to say no or deny any rumors, which is completely understandable, as we've even signed our own NDAs with Nintendo on stuff that we weren't really allowed to talk about and know how they work. As for other remakes or remasters, 𝗏𝗄 with another 2D Zelda remake or a new original 2D Zelda would be possible, but Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask seems like something Nintendo may actually hold off on for Nintendo's next console. 6. Donkey Kong. With Donkey Kong being a featured character in the Mario movie, its most recent games being highly rated and successful, whether the rumors of a mix between a 2D and 3D Donkey Kong game, which have been going around for well over a year now, I think it could be a great idea if done properly. But even if they aren't true, I still think Nintendo would have a third party or even one of their own internal studios working to bring a new spin on the series. 7. Pikmin. Honestly, if I didn't mention Pikmin, I think Daniel would make me go yet another week without food. If I'm lucky, he would throw an old shoe at me. Pikmin is interesting though. Miyamoto, a long time ago, actually around the same time they mentioned Super Mario Galaxy 3 and the Nintendo NX, mentioned Pikmin 4 was close to being finished. Obviously, that game became something else or was put on hold. But I think it has been more than enough time to give us another story in the series. Miyamoto himself is actually a huge fan of the Pikmin series, so it seems like an easy choice. 8. 𝗏𝗄's new game, possibly Zelda. Last year we were told a lot of stuff. Thankfully, through common sense and other sources, we only made videos or discussed on the podcast the rumors that came from people who seemed credible. And I would say 99% of the stuff we said would 100% happen actually did happen. That 1% comes from Ocarina of Time HD, which one of the people said to be working on Breath of the Wild sequel had mentioned Ocarina of Time for Switch. A second source, later on, we were contacted by a certain company that I'll say hinted at Ocarina of Time coming to Switch, as well as a new Metroid for that matter, but that has failed to happen. I know a lot of people are hoping for Link's Awakening style Oracle remakes, but I have a full video here that goes over all of that in great detail using interviews and actual facts. Some may not know, but Grezzo actually has multiple teams. They don't simply work on a single game, and can have 2 or 3 games in development at the same time. Once upon a time, they actually had around 3 Zelda games all being worked on at the same time. So if their Zelda game isn't finished yet, which has now had 3 or 4 years in development, I would love to know what other remakes or original game they could introduce. Let us know which you would like to see. 9. Mario Odyssey 2. This is a quick one. A while back, we covered a leak that correctly gave a lot of details on Sega's new Sonic game. It gave actual screenshots, the correct name for some of the levels or worlds, the official title for the game, and I think even new characters. That same leak had similar details, screenshots, and more for Super Mario Odyssey 2. If the Sonic half of that leak ended up being 100% completely true, a year or 2 before the game was even announced, it makes sense the Mario half should be as well. I'll have that video in the top right corner now, and in the description below, just like the previous videos I mentioned, for those who may want to watch them for all of the other details after this video is done. 10. More cloud games. This is really the only third-party thing I'm going to talk about, and it's basically the bad thing I mentioned for my list. I think we are going to see more games requiring the cloud to be played or streamed on the Switch, which is great for those who do enjoy it. But for those who would love to physically have and be able to play games like the Kingdom Hearts series on the Switch, but don't have great internet, I can understand why they are upset. So why are we going to get even more cloud games? Well, Nintendo was previously getting cloud versions of certain PlayStation 4 and Xbox One games that the developers didn't think would be worth bringing a lackluster port that runs poorly to the Switch, but still wanted the games to be available on Switch because money. So instead of leaving them off entirely, they still gave the option to have them playable or streamed through the cloud. Now, that performance gap between the third-party games developed for other consoles and the Switch is now the size of a canyon as opposed to a smaller gap. If the Switch struggled to run certain games like Witcher 3 or Doom at resolutions around or below 540p, which isn't even HD, and other games were just thought to be entirely impossible to run at all on the Switch, I see most third-party developers simply giving up and not even attempting to bring their games designed specifically for the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, which are several times more powerful than the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, to the Switch instead. If we are lucky, we may end up seeing them available to stream with the cloud. Or if Nintendo does announce their own next-gen console, perhaps it would be able to run the games. Nintendo has recently been making a lot of upgrades to their own servers, and a hint at a big Nintendo Switch Online update has been going around. I just don't want to see third parties treating Nintendo like they did when we rarely seen third-party games come to the Wii and Wii U. And now we're looking at the biggest gap in performance between Nintendo and any other console than we have before, especially comparing something like the Xbox Series X to the Switch, where previously it was the PlayStation 4 and the Wii U, or PlayStation 4 and the Switch. Even comparing the Nintendo Wii to a PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 wasn't even this bad. Now time for the questions. Remember to leave yours in the comments below if you want to be featured on the next video. Wolfie with an IE says, okay, hold up. If there are going to be the champion's ancestors, the ones from Impa's story, then would we see the old hero? I mean, you did talk about the champion ancestors on one of your podcast episodes. Yes. So this comes from the Italian leak for the voice actor of Daruk, who said that he voiced a new character who was an ancestor of Daruk. And presumably, if we see his ancestor, it would most likely end up being someone who is strongly tied to the story, such as the original Goron champion who helped Syl Ganondorf, since I do believe we will end up seeing how exactly Ganondorf became sealed where he is. And instead of seeing just a tapestry, we will end up seeing what actually did happen. And if we end up seeing one of the champions in this backstory, we would likely end up seeing all of the other champions as well, including the Zelda and Link of that time. This wouldn't be the first time that a second Link has appeared in a game, as Twilight Princess heavily featured the Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask Link. Wind Waker had a Hero of Time statue. Minish Cap mentions one of the previous heroes. But I do want to say, no, I do not think multiple versions of Link will be playable, or you'll be able to swap between the two, as some people are theorizing. I think it'll be strictly for storytelling purposes in the cutscenes or past memories. Steven asks, does Nintendo have a typical time frame for how far out they like to start promoting Zelda games? If so, could this help us to predict when we could finally get the title and more information for the sequel to the Breath of the Wild? Sadly, no. Games like Age of Calamity were announced and released just a few months later. Wind Waker HD, Twilight Princess HD, Triforce Heroes, they all seem to have pretty quick times between their announcements and release. And of course, games like Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild 2, and even Ocarina of Time, as well as A Link to the Past, were all announced at least a year or two or more ahead of time. I think Wind Waker, Majora's Mask, Zelda 2, and maybe Minish Cap all released what seemed like almost immediately after announcement. However, the quickest was when Nintendo and Grezzo announced Four Swords Anniversary Edition for the 3DS and had it playable immediately after the Direct for free, which, as of right now, I believe is the only official Zelda game to offer online multiplayer. So, sadly, Nintendo announcing something has absolutely nothing to do with when it's actually going to release, because even if they have a release date planned for, it could always end up being delayed. Hello everyone, I do want to say thank you to some new Patreon supporters. I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing the same thing at the end of our videos over and over again, so from now on I will try to make the end slate for each video new and unique. We do have a few new Patreon supporters here, as well as some older Patreons that have continued to support us. If you have any questions you would like for us to answer, or news and topics you would like us to discuss in a video or our podcast, you can leave them below in the comments, and we will get to as many as we can. And if you are a Patreon supporter, we will guarantee that your answer is moved to the top of the list to be answered or discussed first on our podcast, which happens every Thursday at 9:30 Eastern or 6:30 Pacific. Next Thursday, we may be having one of our friends who has a history of working on the Zelda series coming on our channel. Go ahead and put your guesses on who it may be in the comments below. So a huge thank you to 𝗍𝗵𝗀𝗄𝗏, someone whose name is only donated to hear Jesse speak my name and then didn't give me his name. Gene Pinna, Disappointment, Joseph Stewart, ZAIN JIWANI, SOBERX, Mr. Monocled Metroid, David Guthman, Zoe M, Natsu, Jesse Wood, Andremoy, Ashton, Justin Clark, Candy, Chad Costin, Blargnar, Monica Spath, Lovable Christie, and Gus Calvo. I apologize if I got some of your names wrong. Please comment below, or you can message me directly to correct how I pronounced your name. Thank you all for your support, and I hope these videos keep entertaining everyone.